Hello and welcome back to NEET Prep Go. So today we'll be doing chapter 15 of class 12 ncert biology, biodiversity and conservation. Let's start ncert line by line explanation of it. If an alien from a distant galaxy were to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that he would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions. Why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth's history? How did this diversification come about? How and why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? So basically the first paragraph is pretty self-explanatory. It says that if suddenly an alien were to visit our planet, then it would see the enormous amount of biodiversity. That is there are so many varieties and so many species, 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, 20,000 species of orchids. So not flowers, orchids, even a particular flower has so many species within it. So basically ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been asking questions like, why are there so many species, and did these species exist throughout the history of our planet, and how did the classification come about, and how is all this diversity important to our biosphere as a whole, and will there be a difference if suddenly the diversity is lesser, and how will us human beings benefit from it? So let's start. Now just write this diversity. I would always advise you to write notes. So I'll be making notes side by side, okay? So I'll be reading out line by line, I'll be explaining, and then I'll be making the notes, and at the end we can once revise also through the notes. I'll be making very short notes, only important points that I feel are important and we have to learn. Okay, so let's start. Biodiversity. In our biosphere, immense diversity or heterogeneity exists not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from macromolecules within cells to biomes. Okay, so there is immense diversity, or we can say heterogeneity, not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organization, and it ranges from macromolecules which are inside the cell to biomes. We have studied an ecosystem that biomes, that is organism, then population, then community, then we come to ecosystem, then biome and all, several ecosystems, that is. Now, biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociobiologist Edward Wilson. So, the term biodiversity was popularized by Edward Wilson to describe combined diversity at all levels of biological organization. Okay, to describe combined diversity at all levels of biological organization. Biological organization. Genetic diversity. Genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan ranges might be in terms of potency and concentration of that active chemical rasparin that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1,000 varieties of mango. Species diversity. Diversity at the species level. For example, Western Ghats have greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. Ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its desert, rainforest, mangroves, coral reef, wetland, estuaries and alpine meadows has greater ecosystem diversity than the Scandinavian country like Norway. So basically all these three diversities we have to explain through comparison. So that is, the first one is genetic diversity. How will we define genetic diversity? That is, a single species might show high diversity at genetic level over its distributional range. So genetic level over its distributional range. Okay, for example, the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan ranges might be in terms of potency and concentration of active chemical rasparin. Okay, so the same species, that is, you can give an example of Rauwolfia vomitoria. The same species grows in different parts of different Himalayan ranges. And it is genetically varied on the amount of active chemical that the plant has, that is potency of active chemical rasparin. Then comes species diversity. At the species level diversity, for example, amphibian species are more in Western Ghats than the Eastern Ghats. And then comes the, okay, I'm writing it by the way, in case you guys didn't know. Genetic diversity, species diversity, and then ecological diversity. Ecological diversity, that is at ecosystem level. Here you can give example that India has mangrove, coral reef, rainforest, wetland. India has mangroves, coral reef, wetlands, rainforest and all etc. Unlike, that is, greater diversity, alpine meadows, deserts, alpine meadows, unlike Scandinavian country, you can say Norway. Okay, unlike Norway. Okay, so biodiversity and conservation. Biodiversity term was given by Edward Wilson. It meant that is combined diversity at all levels of biological organization. There are three types of biological diversity, that is genetic diversity, species diversity and ecological diversity. Genetic diversity is at the genetic level, that is same species can have high diversity at the genetic level over its distribution range. For example, raw Wolffia vomitoria, which is a medicinal plant, may vary at the genetic level in different Himalayan ranges on the basis of its potency of the chemical that it has, that is respirin. Okay, then species diversity, that is at the species level. For example, in Western Ghats there is a higher amphibian species are found than the Eastern Ghats. Then ecological diversity, that is on the basis of ecosystem, that is India has coral reefs, desert, rainforest, alpine meadows, mangroves, wetlands, all kinds etc. Okay, whereas any other Scandinavian country on the basis of does not have this much diversity when it comes to ecosystem. For example, Norway. Okay, so Eastern Ghat, Western Ghat for species diversity, raw Wolffia vomitoria, potency level of the chemical respirin for genetic diversity, and for ecological diversity, India versus Norway. Now let's come to the next part. It has taken million years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all that wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rates of species losses continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issues of international concern, as more and more people towards the world begin to realize the critical importance of diversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. So basically, for our survival and well-being on this planet, the biodiversity is very, very important, and such rich biodiversity, which should exist for many more years, will get depleted in less than 2 centuries if the current rates of losses of biodiversity, that is organisms, the depletion continues. Therefore, everyone is realizing the threat, and it is critical for us to conserve this biodiversity. How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species are there on the Earth. According to International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, let's write this definition down. IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature and Resources. Okay, next, that is 2004. Okay, next, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no idea how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates vary widely, and many of them are only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories and more are more complete in temperate than tropical countries. Considering that an overwhelming large population of species is waiting to be discovered in the tropics, biologists make a statistical comparison of the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 billion, but a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Okay, so unrealistic ratios were and estimates were 20 to 50 million, but Robert May made a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate and places the global species diversity at 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all species recorded are animals, while plants including large algae, fungi, bryophyte, gymnosperm, angiosperm comprise no more than 22% of the total. Okay, so 70% of all species are animals, 22% are plants, including algae, fungi, bryophyte, pteridophyte, gymnosperm, angiosperm and all. Among animals, insects are the most species rich taxonomic group, making more than 70% of the total. It is 70% of all animals are insects. Okay, so this is important. 70% of all species are animals, whereas 22% are plants, and 70% of all animals are insects. Now, among animals, insects are the most species-rich taxonomic group. Again, how do we explain this enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles and mammals. Now the fungi species is more than reptiles plus amphibians plus fishes plus mammals. Okay, so invertebrates, insects make up 70%, vertebrates, fishes, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, plants, angiosperm, fungi, Okay, so fungi make up the most, then angiosperm, lichen and ferns and mosses are very less, and algae is second, I think, and then invertebrates, fishes is the most, then comes birds, reptiles, and then mammals and amphibians. Invertebrates, insects is the most, crustaceans and mollusks is next, then crustacean, then other animal groups. It should be noted that these estimates do not give us any figure for prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then diversity might run into millions. Okay, so basically, unfortunately, we got invertebrates, vertebrates and plants, but we cannot do the same for prokaryotes, because checking out the species, distinguishing, classifying microbes is very much difficult. It cannot be done in many places. It cannot even be cultured, okay, and observed so easily in laboratory conditions. So therefore, if we accept the same biochemical or molecular criteria for prokaryotic, then the species may run into millions and even more than that. Okay, now although India has only 2.4% of world's land area, it shares global species diversity an impressive 8.1%. Okay, so we will write this down to land area, okay, of India is only 2.4%, but global species diversity percentage of India is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries. This is why it is one of 12 mega diversity countries. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. Okay, so 45,000 plant species and around 90,000 animal species from India. Okay, then applying this proportion to India's diversity figure, we estimate there are probably more than 1 lakh plant species and more than 3 lakh animal species that are yet to be discovered. More than 1 lakh plant species and 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered. Okay, would we ever be able to complete inventory of the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense trained manpower and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless than we realize that a large fraction of these species faces threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalog the titles of all the books stocked there. Okay, so even though we have only discovered 45,000 plant species and 90,000 animal species, whereas there are over 1 lakh animal species and 1 lakh plant species and 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered, still even before we have discovered it, they are going extinct. That is, diversity loss is happening, therefore we need to conserve it. Otherwise, before we can even discover, the species would be already extinct. So now comes patterns of biodiversity. First is latitudinal gradient. Diversity of plants and animals are not uniform throughout the world. They show rather uneven distribution. For many groups of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity, the most well known being the latitudinal gradient in diversity. Okay, so now we come to patterns of biodiversity, under which first we do latitudinal gradient. Latitudinal gradient of biodiversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the poles. With very few exceptions, tropics, that is latitudinal range of 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degrees south, harbor more species than temperate or polar areas. Okay, so first point would be species diversity decreases as we go from tropics to pole. Now 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degrees south is the tropics. Okay, and this and they have more species diversity than temperate and polar regions. Okay, then the next point will be Colombia, located near equator, has nearly 1400 species of birds, while New York and 41 degree has 105 species, and Greenland at 71 has only 56 species. India, with much of its land area in the tropical latitude, has more than 1200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like equator has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in a temperate region like Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has greatest biodiversity on earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and more than 1,25,000 invertebrate. Scientists estimate that in these rainforests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. So we can remember all this, but yeah, like you have to, there is nothing much to explain in this. So basically the main part of latitudinal gradient is that as we move towards the pole from the equator, the species diversity or the global species diversity, biological diversity decreases. Okay, and tropics is basically 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degree south. So Colombia, which is at the equator, has 1400 species. Okay, you can just write it down in short. That is, Colombia has 1400 species. India has of birds. Okay, they have given example of birds. India has 1200, whereas New York has 105. Greenland has 56. New York has 105. Greenland has 56. Okay, and Amazonian rainforest has the greatest biodiversity on earth. Amazonian rainforest, greatest biodiversity on earth. Okay, now let's move forward. What is so special about tropics which might account for the greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are speciation. Okay, so now the question arises as to why tropics have higher biodiversity. Okay, so the first reason is speciation. Speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciation in the past, tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years, and therefore they have a long evolutionary time for species diversification. Okay, so basically speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike regions being subjected to glaciation, tropical latitudes have remained constant, undisturbed. For millions of years, and evolutionary time for species diversification. Evolutionary time for species diversification. Okay, speciation. Now B is tropical environment. Just a second, I'll write it down, and then although you can skip or forward because yeah, I may be going a bit slow because I'm also making my own notes, because I had actually just read it by underlining. My previous notes, they also got misplaced and also yeah, let me just pause it and then. Okay, so why tropics have higher biodiversity? First is speciation. Speciation is basically a function of time. So unlike temperate and polar regions, over the course of years there have been frequent glaciations and ice formation and weathering and all those things. Compared to that, the tropical regions have fairly remained, undisturbed for millions of years, and this has given evolutionary time for the species diversification, for the species to diversify, particular species and different genetic level and all to diversify. Now tropical environment. Second reason why tropics have higher biodiversity is because of the environment. That is, tropical environment are less seasonal, therefore they are more constant and more predictable also, and therefore they promote niche specialization and lead to more biodiversity. Then the third one is tropical areas have more solar energy, that is of course more sunlight, that is more solar energy, therefore higher productivity. We know that, you know, energy, how it goes in the food chain and all. Higher productivity, then of course higher diversity. Now the second, so all these things, all these 3 points, speciation, tropical environment and solar energy, these three were under latitudinal gradient. Okay, that is the first pattern of biodiversity. Now the second pattern of biodiversity is species area relationship. During his pioneer extensive exploration in the wilderness of South American jungle, the great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region, species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, relation between species richness and area for a wide variety of taxa turns out to be rectangular hyperbola. On a logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by equation log s is equal to log c plus z log a, where s is the species richness, a is the area, z is the slope of the line, and y is the intercept. Okay, now c is the y-intercept. Now ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group for the region. Whether it's plants in Britain or birds in California or mollusk in New York State, the slope of regression line is amazingly similar. If you analyze species area relationship among very large areas like entire continent, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper. For example, for frugivorous fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forest, the slope is found to be 1.15. So here it says that in species area relationship, Alexander von Humboldt observed the relationship between species and area. He said that when the species richness increases when we increase the area that we have explored. So more and more we explore, more and more species we will find, and more species richness, that is biodiversity, will occur, but only up to a limit. So the relation between species richness and the area for a wide variety of taxa is actually comes out to be a rectangular hyperbola in which log s is the species richness, log c is the y-intercept, log a is area, and z is the slope of the graph. So here the graph between species richness and area is there. This is a log scale where log s is equal to log c plus log za. Now here it says that ecologists have seen that value of z, that is the slope of the graph, lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group or the region. Okay, so whatever the taxonomic group it is, or whatever is the region, regardless of that, that is the value of z, that is the slope, lies between 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of taxonomic group or region. Okay, so whether plants in Britain, birds in California, or mollusk in New York, whatever the taxonomic group, whatever the place, the slope is always similar. Okay, whatever may be the area, whatever may be the place, whatever may be the group. But if you analyze species area relationship for very large areas, okay, like entire continents, then for entire continents from 0.1 to 0.2, it actually starts from 0.6 to 1.2. that is, it becomes much more steeper. This is because So large the area, that is log a, becomes very high, right? So log a to the power z is basically z log a. So log a is very high. So this will also be, that is 0. That is, it will also become much more steeper. So z values in the range of 0.6 to 1.2. That is, for example, fruit eating birds and mammals in tropical forest in different continent is found to be 1.15. Now, the importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have not been able to give a definitive answer. So the number of species, does it really matter to the functioning ecosystem? For many decades, ecologists believed that communities with more species are more stable than those with less species. What exactly is stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. Okay, so what exactly is stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, natural or man-made. It must also be resistant to invasion by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness, but David Tillman, in long-term ecosystem experiment using outdoor plots, provide some tentative answer. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. We may not understand how species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem. We know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of human race on this planet. At a time we are losing species at an alarming rate, one might ask, does it really matter if few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystem be less functional if one of its tree frog species lost forever? How is our quality of life affected? If 20,000, we have only 15,000 species. There are no direct answers to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy of the rivet popper hypothesis. Rivet popper hypothesis was given by ecologist Paul N. Ehrlich. In an airplane, let's take the airplane to be ecosystem. All parts are joined together using thousands of rivets. Let the rivets be species. If every species were to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, proper functioning. If every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings is obviously more serious threat to flight safety than loss of few rivets on the seats or windows inside the plane. So here it so in the first part it asks us a question, that is it really important for us to have a stable that is it the biological diversity, is it really important to have a stable community? So it is, yes. So for that we first define what is the stability of a biological community. That is, stability of biological community basically means that there shouldn't be much variation in productivity from year to year. It should be resistant or resilient to man-made, to natural or man-made disturbance. It must also be resistant to invasion of alien species. We didn't know how it would exactly, biodiversity would affect us, but David Tillman in his experiment using outdoor plots gave us some answer. He saw that the more species, that plots with more species showed higher productivity and less variation in total biomass. But then still the main question arises that if there are 20,000 species in Western Ghat and 5,000 get extinct, will it really affect us human beings, or the entire or the life, that is our daily life in such a, will it make such a huge impact? This can be done, this question can be answered by the rivet popper hypothesis, which was used by the Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. So Paul Ehrlich basically said in his hypothesis that if we take an airplane and assume the airplane to be our ecosystem, and then we join the parts of the airplane with the help of many rivets, and we take the rivets to be our species. So if every passenger that boards the flight wants to take a rivet back home, or a species goes extinct, that is, in other words, then it won't make much of a difference initially. But as more and more passengers take more and more rivets, and these rivets start popping, then over a period of time the flight will of course become dangerously weak. And furthermore, it will also depend which rivet we are taking and where we are taking it from. If we take a rivet from the wings, then it may actually harm the proper functioning of the plane, and it may also go down. Whereas if we take one from the window or somewhere in the seat, then it won't make that much of a difference. And slowly it may cause a serious threat to the flight, and the flight will eventually crash. So therefore, this was the rivet popper hypothesis. So this is the first part of the chapter. In the next video, we'll do the second part of biodiversity and conservation. Line by line, we'll discuss the questions, and then we'll move on to biotechnology and its application. Thank you.